Welcome. My name is Savannah, and I am the Book Week coordinator with SAS Books. Tonight, we're really excited to feature Karin Melberg Schwier, who you are all here to see with her debut novel, Small Reckonings. So we're really excited about that. It's going to be a reading, and then there'll be some time for questions at the end. And yeah, so I'm really excited. This is going to be really, really lovely. So just before we get started, we just want to do a couple acknowledgements. First of all, SAS Books is located on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, which sits on the homeland of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people, as well as the Métis Nation. Karin is joining us from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon, which encompasses the traditional territories of numerous First Nations, including Cree, Dene, Nakota, Saulteaux, Ojibwe, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. We want to make sure we take time to pay our respects to the ancestors of this place and acknowledge the historic and ongoing care of these lands. Also, we want to thank our funders, the Department of Canadian Heritage and the Canada Council for the Arts. Without their support, Book Week would not be possible. So we're really thankful that we're able to have this tonight. So Karin is a freelance writer, editor, illustrator, and the editor-writer for Saskatoon Home Magazine, and she's a writer at Prairies North. She has written 8 nonfiction books, including 2 illustrated children's books exploring the lives of people with intellectual disabilities, and has edited several others. One book was translated into German, Italian, and Korean. Actor Benjamin Bratt performed a piece from another as a dramatic reading at the Santa Monica Playhouse. In 2013, Karin received a YWCA Women of Distinction Award, Arts and Culture, for her writing on disability issues. Small Reckonings is her first novel, which is in its 2nd printing already. So congratulations on that as well. And also her book is the backdrop here. And also on her screen. So please join me in welcoming Karin Melberg Schwier tonight. I'm gonna mute myself.
Hello, everybody. Wow, I can't believe how many people turned out for this. This is great. Thanks to SAS Books for featuring my novel along with this great lineup this week, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the other presentations. And I'm just really honored to be part of the week, and just really excited that so many people are having their supper and listening and being part of this. Just a couple of things. I've picked three pieces that I want to read tonight. But first, I just want to take a couple of seconds. I said at the Hicks Award last fall that I think it must take a village to raise a novel, because there are a lot of people who've helped me get this to where it is. My acknowledgement section in the book is a long one, but I want to thank 2 people in particular tonight before we get started. A big thank you, and I hope he's in there somewhere. Annette said that he was trying to log in, but Hank Buck is a retired farmer in Abbey, Saskatchewan, and I think he's in his 80s now, but years ago he told me the real story of William and Violet. And I just remember thinking, this has to be a novel. And he gave me his blessing to fictionalize it and take it beyond that, that true story. And so Violet wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Hank. And it's very weird to have a character in your novel call you on the phone and say, "Hey, it's Hank. How are you doing today?" And think, this is really weird, because, oh yeah, he's the real Hank, and there's another one in the novel. I also want to thank Berna Barclay from Burton House Books. I met her through Word on the Street Festival about 3 years ago, I think, and she agreed to read my manuscript. I had a big pile of rejection letters that I'd been collecting and faithfully storing away in a file for a long, long time. And I think once she read the manuscript, I realized that I wasn't anywhere near having it ready, so I had sent it out way too early. And she read the manuscript, and in 2 weeks she said, well, we've got to meet about this. I'll be in Saskatoon. I remember walking across the University Bridge, and it was about 30 below, and I went to meet her at the Parktown. She was in for a writer's meeting or a conference of some kind, and she came walking in with my manuscript torn in two big piles. There were sticky notes everywhere, and she plunked the first one down on the table, and she said, this is your first novel. And she put the second one down, and she said, this is your second, so let's get to work on the first. And so Small Reckonings wouldn't be here without Berna. And that second pile is the sequel that's well underway right now. So I owe her a lot. For readings, I always find it a little bit difficult to know which pieces to pick. I mean, I've got my favorites that I really had fun reading, pieces that I really struggled with. What I did was, because I remember Alice Kuipers told me years ago, she said, if you can't bring yourself to read the very first part of your novel at an author reading, it's probably not good enough to be in the novel. So in her honor, I'm going to read the very first piece, which is essentially a flash forward. The real novel starts, or not the real novel, the story starts really in 1915. The flash forward starts in 1935. And that's essentially, we're not calling it a prologue, but that's really what it is. And then I've got two other pieces that I've picked, mainly because I really had fun writing them. And the one reminds me a lot of my own childhood on the farm. So hopefully I won't spoil anything for people who haven't read it yet. Alexa and my son Jim timed me, so I think with the three pieces, it's about 20 minutes or so. If people are getting tired and want me to stop, just wave or leave the room or something. Just to orient you a little bit, the cast of characters you're going to be reading tonight includes William Burke, who is a homesteader who came to Canada from New Zealand. His wife Louise, a woman he met in Toronto and brought west with him. She has a past. Together they start a life on a farm near Watrous, Saskatchewan. Their son John is born in 1916. And 4 years later, their daughter Violet is born. And in the terminology of the day, she is feeble-minded. There's Hank, my buddy Hank, a lifelong friend who met William as a young boy when William first arrived to prove up his land. There's Nick Usick, another neighboring farmer. William calls him rough as guts. And Nick's wife Hanusha. They have several sons, but you don't meet them yet. Constable Dickinson, you'll meet in the prologue, and then he shows up later in the novel. So that's to get you oriented. The structure of the novel is that each chapter is from a particular character's point of view. So it'll start out with that person's name, with the location and the date. So with that, and when I started writing this novel, I didn't need glasses to read, but it's been that long. So the first piece then is Constable Albert Dickinson at the Usick Farm near Watrous, Saskatchewan, 1935. Constable Albert Dickinson took off his Stetson in the doorway, slapped it against the sleeve of his brown serge, and waited for his eyes to adjust to the dim interior of the barn. The cows looked like they'd been bunched up out at the gate for a good while, bellowing, their bony spines arched and white, hoarfrost on their haunches. He breathed in as much air as the dust and stench of scours would allow, and took a few steps inside. He looked up first and saw the body, then broke his gaze when a calf bleated, a pitiful thin noise off to the left. Sick and skinny, the calf stood trembling in the pen, gaping at him with sunken gray eyes. Albert took a few more steps. With the toe of his boot, he nudged the mound of bedding bunched up on a straw pile. It looked like Nick had been bunking in the barn for some time. All his meager provisions laid out. A milk bottle, half empty, bucket, tin cup, plate, knife and fork, unwashed, remnants of beans and bread crust. A mason jar that Albert bet would smell of potato wine if he were to unscrew the lid. Long John's undershirt, wool socks hung over the stanchion. A yellow spray of scours across the end of the old quilt was dry. The dog's growls pulled Albert from his inventory. He moved slowly toward the dog, on guard near the milk stool, lips grinned back and a low rumble in its chest. It took Albert a moment to realize the form behind the dog was Nick's wife, crumpled in the dirt on her knees. Hanusha had one hand clamped firmly over her mouth, the other on Nick's boot. Her grasp made the body rotate slightly, turning Nick away from Albert and toward the back of the barn. Albert reached down and lifted the woman, stood her on her feet, and told her to take the dog and go back to the house. She looked up at him with the same sick calf stare. He pressed her shoulder gently. Go on now, I'll take care of him. Go on, I'll be up to the house shortly. Go on. Her face twisted and a moan began deep in her throat. With a trembling hand, she clawed at the dog, grabbed it by the scruff of the neck, and pulled it toward the open barn door. Albert put a hand on the woman's elbow, steadying her, and walked with her that far. No good, no good, he is no good, Ditko, Hanusha stammered. She pulled at the dog again and turned to look at the constable. Her thin face was a storm of fury and confusion. Her free hand clenched into a fist and she shook it at him. No good, Ditko, Ditko. Albert watched her stumble across the yard with the animal. By the time she was halfway, she began to wail and cry out. Ukrainian, Albert supposed. No doubt she'd be on the telephone to her sister, and the neighbor women would be rubbering on the party line. Soon every farmer for miles would know about it. After what had happened to the Burke girl, Albert wondered how that child's father would take the news. He turned and walked back into the barn. He moved aside the leg irons hanging from his duty belt. They were irrelevant now. He pulled the knife from the pocket of his trousers and opened the blade. Nick didn't have the look people tend to get when they hang themselves. He didn't look scared, not even desperate, just ordinary, maybe a little tired, as if he was just standing there waiting. Albert guessed a good 2 feet between Nick's boots and the barn floor. Nick's eyes were open, staring, all shot through with blood, of course, that's what happens. Not wild-eyed, though, more as if he'd given it some consideration and just preferred to get it over and done with. That's the opening. Okay, now, this is one of my favorite parts. This next piece is then from the perspective of the brother John, and it's at the Burke farm in September of 1927. So John has just come off an experience with his sister and a friend. The Violet is 4 years younger, and she's, he's in part embarrassed by her because of her disability. He feels responsible for her. He wants to protect her, but she just makes him angry sometimes, and he gets frustrated. So this is from John's perspective, just coming off of this incident where Violet has really embarrassed him in front of a friend. Everybody's good? Everybody can, good. Okay, yay, okay. For a week, John wrestled with his guilt. He took turns being angry at Violet, then avoiding her, and then, as remorse took over, trying to do everything for her. The night Louise served rhubarb pie after dinner, John saved the fluted edge, his favorite, and slid the crust onto Violet's plate. If his parents noticed, they said nothing. After supper, with a flourish, William marked in black grease pencil a large circle on the kitchen calendar in early October. Chicken butchering day, you two, he announced. I need your help, John, and Violet too, if she can stomach it. William reached down and pinched Violet's nose. He flicked a bit of butter from her cheek. You might not care for the sight at the beginning, but I've seen you light up when your mother makes her fried chicken. While William sharpened the axe that morning on the stone in the machine shed, John stood silently watching with his hands deep in his overall pockets. Somehow the scraping sounds helped John sort out the words he needed. "What's on your mind, lad?" William said quietly, working the axe blade across the stone. He cranked the handle with one and adjusted the angle of the axe with the other. Without looking up, he said, "You can tell your old father." "It's Violet." It seemed a full minute passed while William worked the blade on the stone. A spark danced up and landed on the dirt. John put the toe of his boot on it. "She makes me so mad sometimes," he took a breath, "but I guess she can't help it. It's just that I tell her something and she knows and then she forgets and does the same dumb thing again." "And that makes you cross," William said, nodding. "Really mad, Father. Sometimes I feel so mad I could just hit her." "But then you don't," William said. John shook his head. "What keeps you from hitting her?" John thought for a moment and shrugged. "Well, I guess it wouldn't help. It's better to go somewhere else if you're mad. Isn't that right? Violet does a lot better if you help her when you're not mad. If you're mad, it's just your problem, and she doesn't understand that. She just gets upset." "But sometimes it's hard," William agreed. 3 more sparks leapt up and drifted down to the dirt floor of the machine shed. John stepped on each one. William cupped his hand and dipped it into a pail at his feet. He scooped a bit of water on the stone to slough off the grit. A stream puddled in the dust. "You're a good boy, John." William stopped the stone and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother and I know you've got a big responsibility with Violet. She looks up to you and tries to make you proud of her. That's a big job for her. Here, hand me that rag." John pulled a piece of feed sack from a nail on the wall. He wiped his nose on his sleeve. "You'll be a fine teacher one day, John. I know it," William said, polishing the axe blade. "You have a fine mind and a generous spirit. Being a teacher is an honorable profession to help your students discover the best within themselves. You do that every day with your sister, and I'm very proud of you." John couldn't believe it, but his eyes filled with hot tears. He tried to wipe them away before his father could see. William reached out a hand and they shook on it. "Let's go do in some of those tough old hens," William said. "That'll cheer us up, eh?" It was almost midday when John was standing in his assigned spot waiting for William to lop the head off another bird. Violet, who couldn't bear to watch, but couldn't bear to be too far away from the action, was hiding behind the woodpile. John could see her looking out each time the cackling died down. "Okay, here we go," called out William. The axe came down with a solid thwack, and he threw the chicken in the air to bleed it clean. When the chicken hit the ground, the fact that its head was missing didn't slow it down. It reared up and made a beeline for Violet's hiding spot. With a screech, she scrambled over the wood chunks and out across the yard, zigzagging, with the chicken honing in on every turn right at her heels. "Off me, off me, off me, John!" Violet cried. She looped back and headed straight for John, hollering with her arms open wide as if she meant to leap into his. She hit him hard and they both went over backwards in a heap at William's feet. The chicken, sated from his gory chase, fell over dead in the sawdust beside the chopping block where its escape bid had begun. William chuckled once he realized his children were all right. Then he began to laugh, and he had to sit down on the chopping block and hold his stomach. The children watched him for a few moments, then Violet began to giggle. Soon the 3 of them were laughing and hooting so loudly, Louise appeared on the porch to see what the commotion was about. It was a good 10 minutes and several false starts before William could trust himself to swing the axe again. John mulled it over for the rest of the day. The thing that stood out in the chaos was that Violet had turned to him and expected him to protect her. He was the big brother. Just like William said, it wasn't easy, but it was honorable. That evening, over a supper of fried chicken, William told the story to Louise at least twice. To demonstrate, he picked up a drumstick and waved it in circles. "The poor old hen, and here's our Violet," he said, grabbing a biscuit, rolling it across the table to bounce off John's milk glass. The 3 of them had giggling fits all over again. William finally wiped his eyes with a serviette and took his plate out to the sideboard, while Louise cleared away the rest of the dishes. John brought his homework to the kitchen table. He took out a sheet of paper and a pencil for Violet, Pulling a chair up close, he held it for her while she climbed up. "Let's do our schoolwork, Violet," he said. "Come on, you're old enough to know how to spell your whole name. First, you're going to learn how to make a V. That's the first letter for Violet. Burke starts with a B." "V, V, V, B, B," Violet chanted. "I go to school, John." "Yep, this is your school. And when you get your name right," John promised, "we can write the word chicken." Okay, everybody's good? We're still okay? Everybody's still there? Okay. Okay, so the last piece that I chose to read is set in October 1935. So we've kind of come full circle back to that first prologue. This is from William's point of view, and he's just been at the Holy Trinity Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Never went into the church, but he felt he wanted to be close by. So this is at the end of his visit to that church. He started the engine, turned the truck around back the way he'd come, and drove home. He parked the truck at the side of the house, blew his nose again, and walked heavily up to the porch. A breeze scattered frost from the bushes. William shivered and shrugged up his shoulders. Then he stepped up on the porch. A faint tinkling sound caught his ear. He stopped and turned toward it. Down at the end, hanging from a nail in the rafter, was Violet's wind chime. It tinkled again and was still. "How did that get back up there?" he whispered, clearly remembering how he'd torn it down and threw it into the burning barrel behind the house. Had she seen him do it? William glanced through the kitchen window. Violet was up, and he knew she had the radio on. Her back was to him. She poked at the wood in the firebox and blew on her hands, holding them over the warm steam lifting from the oatmeal she'd started for breakfast. She lifted the wooden spoon and tasted, nodding to herself. He crept past the window and walked the length of the porch, stepping wide around the warped plank that always squealed at the slightest footfall. William could just reach the chime on tiptoe, and he closed his fist around it quickly to keep it quiet. How had she managed to hang that back up there by herself? Maybe she thought he wouldn't see the chimes, or maybe he wouldn't hear him at the far end. He held the spoons hard, and the cold metal bit into his bare skin. There was black soot from the burning barrel in the holes Nick had drilled, but William could see how Violet had tried to clean them. What had she been thinking? It was better, he felt sure, if there was nothing left to remind her of what happened that day. He held the spoons for a time, feeling the cold course up his arm. He looked up, past the frost-covered caragana hedge to where the edge of the coulee fell away well back of the chicken coop. Skunks, coyotes maybe, coming up to hopefully inspect the coop for a door left unlatched, had made a narrow gray path through the snow. William stepped off the porch and followed it, careful not to let the spiky thorns hook his trousers as he picked his way around the dry stickseed and bluebur flagging the trail. The coulee had slowly been advancing on the house for a few years now, and even though the buildings were in no danger, William was surprised and a little startled to see how much more of the bank had crumbled away. He must remember to tell Violet not to go near the edge. The ground seemed solid on top, but as he leaned forward and looked both ways, he could see deep fissures in the sandy banks where pieces of land jutted out. He recalled the calf that had gone over the edge and had to be shot. It was worse now. One step and a person would go with the slide all the way to the bottom. He used to tether Hannah with her calves out there to keep the grass short, which had cut down on the mosquitoes each spring, but the topsoil was only a few inches deep. With no trees to hold the soil in place, the coulee was relentlessly becoming a few inches wider each year. By next fall, part of that old barbed wire fence behind the chicken coop could be dangling in midair, and it wouldn't be too long before the back end of the coop would do the same. He'd have to see to that come spring. A sharp stab of cold ran up William's arm, and he looked down at the spoons still gripped tightly in his hand. He looked at them for a long time, and then, with one fluid motion that would make his childhood cricket mates proud, William hurled them with such force they whistled as they passed his ear. William dropped his arms. Twisting, the wind chimes rose, arced, tinkled, glinted in the morning sun, and then disappeared against the black stretch of spruce on the far bank and into the coulee below. He felt an odd sudden peace course through him. A deep breath came easier, pushing aside those hateful thoughts about Nick. The violence with a vengeance imagined, and repentance he dreamed of extracting from the man. The final words from Nick's obituary came into his head unbidden. Perhaps he'd held the thought at the back of his mind all morning. In that fair land awaiting me, William whispered, I shall from ills and pain be free. He stood for a moment near the edge of the coulee, then he turned and made his way back through the drifts toward the light in the kitchen window. He crossed the porch and opened the door to a warm kitchen and the comforting smell of fried eggs and the gray paste that was Violet's porridge. Violet was singing with gusto along with Rudy Valley on the radio. She looked up, and even as she missed a few words here and there, and sometimes adding her own, William sang too. You must remember this, a kiss is still for kiss, a sigh is just for sigh. Time goes by and you can surely rely. We still say, I love you, and you are welcome, please, and thank you too, when time goes by. Sitting down at the table in her blue robe, she surveyed her handiwork. She'd set the table for two and had cooked the eggs and already arranged them, now cool and rubbery, on the plates. She beamed at him. You do bacon, she said, pointing at the skillet, which was smoking slightly. It spits at me all the time. She had made toast too, and a cold stack was piled on a plate at his place. She folded her hands carefully across her belly and waited. Rudy continued to croon, and William turned down the radio a bit. He looked out the kitchen window. He wondered when or if she would ever notice the wind chimes was gone. He cut 4 thick slices of bacon and laid them carefully in the hot grease. A lot of people gone now, right, Father? Violet asked suddenly, her voice small as she slid his blue mug toward his place across the table. She hadn't asked him where he'd been. She usually assumed that whatever he did was the right thing to do. He was Father. He knew it must seem to her that people were always dying, always going away. That surely would appear to be the truth, Violet. You're right as rain about that. We miss them all, but we'll be right, you and me, right as rain. You and me, she nodded. 2 boxes of fluffy ducks. For the second time that morning, tears burned in his eyes. He bent over the skillet and poked a fork at the bacon. The two of them were quiet for a while and listened to Rudy and the bacon snapping in the pan. Violet got up and held out their plates. William shook off the extra grease and laid the hot bacon across the eggs, hoping to warm them up a little. He took his plate and gave her a kiss on the cheek. They sat down, and Violet took up a forkful of egg. He reached out and cupped her cheek with one hand. We've got some sorting out to do, my girl. But I've cast off a few things today, and I do feel a good sight better now. Violet put the forkful of eggs into her mouth. William did feel better, but nothing would ever be the same again.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Are we okay for time?
You're amazing. That was lovely. That was perfect. Thank you. There's little, I don't know if you can see, but there's little hands clapping in corners. So
good.
Clapping. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karin. I guess you should soak all that in.
Okay.
Everyone. And if you have questions for Karin, you can send them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. And yeah, so
don't ask anything hard.
I don't know if we already have a question. Okay. So this one comes from Joanne Skidmore. What does the real Hank think about the novel?
Well, that's a good question. He was actually just here about a month ago, and it was really nice that he said I was just free to go ahead and take that seed of that story and just do what I wanted with it. He wasn't, he's very, very great guy, and very plain spoken. And he said, whatever you create, that's not the real story, but it's all based on that real story. So he was fine. I think he got kind of a kick out of being a character, sort of immortalized a little bit. But no, he was fine with the way the story turned out. Knowing that it's not, that it's my story. It's not, I wasn't trying to make it an expansion of his. So I was really lucky that he, gave me his blessing to go ahead and do what I felt needed to be done with it.
Okay, we have another question from Alice Coopers. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Kuipers.
Kuipers? Okay. Thank you. In writing your story, what made you decide to invent as opposed to staying faithful to the real story, especially as you write so much nonfiction?
Oh, see, I told you not to ask hard. It's funny. I mean, I had that true story initially, and as I played with it and I mean, dreamt about it and tried out different scenarios, because I didn't want it to be that original story. I wanted it to have a bigger life of its own. I wanted to introduce other characters. Things just, and things just started kind of happening, and characters kind of started doing things, not without me, but they, as those characters were developed, they kind of started doing things that, every once in a while that would make sense, that character would do this. So it's true. I think I was attracted to the story because of a lot of my nonfiction work. But then as I started just imagining what else might happen, it kind of just grew from there. Did that answer your question? Maybe not. Sort of, yeah.
That was from Yan, by the way. There was a note added as well.
Oh. Good. Okay.
We have another question from Elizabeth Bowling. The book is so rich with the details of living the homesteader life of the time. Tell us about the research you did to capture and use these details, please.
Okay. I've always been kind of fascinated by homesteading stories, and when I was still in high school, this was in northern Alberta, I interviewed, as sort of a series for the newspaper, a lot of the homesteaders of the Peace River region in northern Alberta, and it was all first person. I remember not having a tape recorder, and just would write as fast as I could when they'd tell their stories. And they became a really popular feature in the newspaper, so much so that we ended up collecting them in a book and publishing the whole collection of them, about, I think, 25 or 30 stories. And I love nothing better than spending an afternoon with somebody who had homesteaded, and now they're in their 90s, and they're telling me stories about what it was, the really specific details about what that meant and what their life was like then. So I guess, I mean, I didn't know it until I started working on the story, but I started doing the research for this story when I was 17. And it's just, I mean, from my own farming background, had farming grandparents, I think, they always say, write what you know. And I think it's, also write what fascinates you and what interests you. And that has always been kind of part of my life. So that, combined with the work I've done writing about people with disabilities and their families and their life experiences, and putting those two together, kind of made sense for this story.
Thank you. We have two more questions. The first one that's next is from Lisa Bendall. Longtime fan here. Loved your readings. How is the sequel coming along?
Um, well, when Berna tore my manuscript in two and said, "Here's your second novel," um, it was hard to work on the first one because I kept in my head all the things that happened in the second half. So it was difficult, really making the separation of those two stories. I would guess, although a good editor would probably tell me I'm wrong, but I would guess the sequel is about 2/3 finished, half finished. Now the trick is going to be making sure it ties back in with all the detail of the first story. Um, but I've had a lot of people ask about that, so there's no pressure or anything to get it finished.
I think we're all really excited for the next one. Joanne Skidmore has another question. The text creates such vivid pictures. Have you considered having an audiobook produced?
Oh, I've been asked that. A few people have asked that. Dare I say, I almost hate to say this in the presence of Yan, but somebody actually suggested that it would make a good movie. So that was heartening to hear. But yes, an audio book. I've received requests. I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. Feel free to send more questions. I do have one for you. What advice would you be giving to folks who are trying to finish their first novel and publish their first novel? You talked a little bit about your experience at the beginning, but you want to speak a little bit more to that?
I think my first, just off the top of my head, would be do the work. You've got to do the work. I spent a long time. I mean, I was working full time, and the novel was always in my head. I was always, I need some time to just sit down and get to it. I think I burned a lot of bridges with publishers because I sent it out way too early. And you can't pester a publisher with the third and fourth and fifth, try at your novel. Um, Listen to advice from a lot of established writers. I mean, if you're at the point where you've got a good, a good manuscript that you feel confident about, get a good editor. There was so much that Berna worked with me on that I had it in my head that I knew what I meant, but I hadn't always translated that or transferred that to the page. And somebody else who's good at editing is really a valuable resource. But I think the other thing is just believe that you can do it. Believe that if you've got a good story and you really honestly think that it'll become something, then it's so worth the investment of your time and creative energy to get it done.
Thank you. That's awesome. Good advice for all us listening who are trying. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? Just feel free to send it in the chat or raise your hand. Another question I actually also had was, so you've written on neurodiverse people before and folks with disabilities before. How did your approach to the topic change while writing the novel, or how did it stay the same?
I've always, a lot of my writing, the nonfiction work I've done about people with intellectual disabilities or other disabilities, I've always tried to really stay true to their voice. If I was doing a story about somebody's experience living in an institution, I didn't want it to be my kind of interpretation of that experience. I did a lot of first person work. so I think you have to really pay attention to the character, um, be as honor their voice as much as possible. Sometimes it's a little difficult, and some of my rejection letters from publishers said, you know, you can't have a main character with an intellectual disability because they're not a reliable narrator, which I always thought was kind of odd. But I mean, and you do have to support that character with other people who are helping her tell her story. I took a class from Guy Vanderhaeg years ago when I was just starting to fiddle with this story, and I worried that, you know, I don't want my readers, if this becomes a novel, I don't want my readers to see that character. I don't want to see them to see Violet as a stereotype. And his advice was, well, then don't write a stereotypical character. Oh, I get, okay. But it's true, you know, don't write a character with a disability. You write a character called Violet, and she has a disability, and she lives on a farm, and she lives in this family, and here's all the other dynamics. You have to, you know, write characters, develop characters that are well-rounded and have lots of attributes and good things and bad things about them, so that they're believable.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have 2 more questions that just popped up. One is from Aaron Schwier.
No relation. No relation.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, what's going on here? She's wanting to know, since releasing the book, what have been some of the more unexpected results and responses? Oh, and she also wants you to know that she is the favorite.
Oh, right. And, yeah, and she is, and that's what I tell Ben, and that's what I tell Jim too. So unexpected. Well, winning the Hicks Award was pretty unexpected when it was, you know, it's still in manuscript form. I think and this sounds kind of goofy, but I think my biggest surprise was how much people enjoy the story. You know, I mean, you know, you hope for that, and you hope for good response. But I have received so many unsolicited, I mean, honest to God, unsolicited letters and reviews from people who've read it, people I know and people I don't know, who it would evoke all sorts of memories in them about their childhood, you know, growing up on a farm, or their grandparents, or I mean, I've had some letters about, you know, people who've suffered abuse, and you know, that it wasn't spoken about in the family, and so how they could relate with some of the characters in the book. It's really been, I think that's probably has been the biggest joy, I guess. Just, I mean, I've kept all of them, and I try to respond to all of them. But I just, that feedback has really been gratifying.
That's awesome. Thank you. Elizabeth Bowling has a question. How do you manage shifting from a nonfiction voice to journalistic to fiction? What is that like for you?
I don't know how to answer that. I think compartmentalizing. You know, when I have my nonfiction stuff, I kind of set aside, you know, the other type. I mean, this novel was my first kind of big, you know, leap into fiction. I guess maybe it's not that different though. Maybe the style, because I want to tell those stories. When I do articles for Home Magazine, you know, I tend to go toward more of the human interest kinds of stuff. You know, I don't necessarily care that much about, you know, new high efficiency furnaces and how they work, and, you know, that sort of thing. A lot of people are really interested in that kind of article. I like to do, you know, what's the people focus? What's the, you know, what's the people story in the article. So in that way, I guess, because that's what I was trying to do in the novel, develop those characters. Maybe I do that in nonfiction. I develop the character rather than, the more technical elements of a story, I think. I don't, Elizabeth, does that make any sense? Indeed.
Indeed. Amazing. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Slash, there's already another question there. So Brenda N says, thank you for the selections from the novel. Is there some way the reader can access the original nonfiction version? It might be interesting to pair a short précis of the original with portions of the novel in your marketing.
Oh, ooh. I've never written the true story. I mean, I know what happened, if anybody would like to know, but then that's a big spoiler alert for people who haven't read the book. There are, this is what I should tell you too. But that's a good idea. I should write up what really, the true part of the original story. I should write that up. But there really was a William and a Violet. There really was a Hank. There was a neighboring farmer. Bad things happened. Good things happened. Bad things happened. But when Hank came to visit me this spring, he brought me seed potatoes, and he came to visit me, and I said, Hank, would you tell me the story again? Because I had been so fascinated years before when he told me that story. And he started talking, and he told me, most of what he had told me originally. And then he said, oh, and by the way, there's this. And I mean, my jaw just dropped. And I said, you never told me that part of the story before. And he said, oh, sure I did. And I said, no, you didn't. That you've never told me that part. So that part is the entire twist on the story that will be the sequel. So Hank said, I can't believe I didn't tell you that, because that was a pretty big part of the story. And I said, I think I would have remembered that. So anyway, so there's a big twist. So what you think happens at the end of this novel might not be entirely what happens in the second.
How exciting. We have something to look forward to. Actually, I lied. There's one more question here from Anne Brierly. From start to date of publication, how long, I'm assuming, did it take you to complete the novel? Sorry.
You'd be asking me, oh, you rat. I remember when I was in a Writers Guild mentorship with Joanne Gerber, and this was probably 2000 or something, 2001 maybe, I don't know. And I thought I had, I think I probably had 100 pages of this initial draft done, and I thought, any minute now, a publisher was going to come along and snap this up. And I remember her saying, Karin, I think if we work on this and you really, really bear down on it, maybe in 4 or 5 years, you could have a manuscript that would be publishable. And I thought, 4 or 5 years? Are you crazy? I'm used to working on a deadline for magazine stories. I mean, I've got to have this done in 3 weeks. And so, Anne, thanks very much for making me say this, but I think I started on seriously started on it in about 2001. And then, as I said, burned my bridges with a lot of publishers by sending it out too early. And when you submit to a publisher, you can't, most publishers at that time didn't want simultaneous or multiple submissions to different publishers. You submitted to one and then you waited. So, I mean, I waited and then would get the rejection back 8 months later, 10 months later. And I'd, work on it, try it again, wait a year, here late, there was one publisher I waited for about 2.5 years. So, I mean, it's not like I don't want people to think that I worked steadily on it for 19 years and finally it came out. But, there were long periods where I would put it aside and just not do anything on it, and then would have kind of a burst of enthusiasm and pick it up again. But yeah, it took, part-time work, and the characters rode around in my head even when I wasn't working on the manuscript. And I remember my husband, when I was describing characters to him, I would be doing this. I would say, well, Hank is kind of like this, and he's got, he does these things, and this is what he's like as a kid. And then my husband noticed, and I didn't, but my husband noticed when I had characters more fully formed, I would just talk about them as if they were people, and not, he said it was almost like I was trying to form the characters as I was initially thinking about them. But then they kind of took on a life, and they actually, I heard this in an interview one time, that a writer was saying, oh yeah, I hear my writer or my characters talk to me, and it's like real people. And I thought, you are just making that up. And actually it's true. They do. I think I have dreams of my characters doing things that have nothing to do with the book, which is either really cool or kind of creepy.
I think it's pretty cool. I think we can agree it's pretty cool. All right. Thank you so much, Karin. That was amazing. I think then that will conclude our Q&A session, if that is okay with everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Karin, for your amazing reading and your lovely responses to the questions. And thank you also, everyone, for asking questions, such great questions, and coming to join us this evening. Yeah, Karin, thank you so much. This was really so lovely. So thank you so much for joining us this year.
This was great. Thanks for including my novel in the lineup for this week. That's been really great.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So thank you. Also, shout out to the crew at SAS Books for all your help in making this happen. Thanks for all the help. Thanks to our funders again. And in terms of buying the book, we would encourage you to support our indie bookshops as much as possible. So in Saskatoon, that's Turning the Tide, McNally Robinson. In Regina, we have a new independent bookstore, the Penny University Bookstore. And also you can buy through our website, SAS Books Bookstore, online as well. So
and I have
options.
And
Karin has copies. How would you like to do that?
If people want to just email me, Karin, Kairn .Schwier, SCHWIER @mac.com.
Did everyone? Oh, someone already Emily is a superstar. She's already typed it for your convenience.
IER.
Oh, opposite, yeah, SCHIER. If you want to copy the one that I'm sure is on its way, there it is. If you want to copy that and send Karin an email, I think that would be great. Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And also, there are more book week events happening. So this is the first one of the week. There's a full lineup on the SAS Books Book Week website, on our Facebook page. And yeah, there's a lot happening. We're doing some very small scale COVID-friendly readings, and then everything else is online. So it would be lovely if you come check that out. And thank you again, Karin. You're amazing. And yeah, hope you have all a lovely evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. This was really great. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care, everyone.